Okay, so let's go to our final story about the COVID shots, myocarditis. Let's start with some of the mainstream propaganda. NBC News says COVID vaccines are not linked to fatal heart problems in young people, CDC finds. Well, there we go. That's it. That's all I need to know. This new report debunks widespread misinformation that the mRNA shots were connected to sudden cardiac deaths in young athletes. This was published April 11, 2024. There is no evidence that COVID vaccines cause fatal cardiac arrest or other deadly heart problems in teens and young adults. A Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report published a couple of Thursdays ago says, ever since the COVID vaccines were authorized in late 2020, anti-vaccination groups in the U.S. blame the shots for fatal heart problems in young athletes. And they go on to talk about like the football player Damar Hamlin and plenty of other people who may have died. But this study says the findings in a new report came from an analysis of nearly 1,300 certificates of Oregon residents from age 16 to 30 who died from any heart condition or unknown reason between June 1st, 2021 and December 31st, 2022. During this time, nearly 1 million teens and young adults in the state had gotten a COVID vaccine, the authors write. The authors refined their focus to people who got an mRNA COVID vaccine from Pfizer and Moderna and died within 100 days of being vaccinated. Out of the 40 deaths that they say occurred among people who got an mRNA COVID vaccine, 3 occurred within that time frame. 2 of them were attributed to underlying chronic health conditions. The third death was recorded as an undetermined natural cause because there was alcohol and cannabis in their system. The medical examiner could neither confirm nor exclude COVID vaccine as the cause of death. I think that's important. It didn't exclude it. However, none of the death certificates attribute the fatalities to the vaccines. That doesn't mean that it didn't play a role, but that's what they want you to believe. And while it remains unclear whether the vaccine caused the third death, the researcher noted that the analysis showed that the 30 people died from COVID during the whole time frame, the majority of whom were not vaccinated. And they say, as the usual refrain, safe and effective, blah, blah, blah. So there you go, guys. CDC says it's all good, nothing to worry about. All that stuff you've been hearing about is propaganda. This was April 11th. But things can change quickly. And right after that, a couple days later, Children's Health Defense write this report. New CDC report denies link between COVID shots and sudden deaths in young adults. And they repeat what I just said to you, but let's see what other kind of information they add. They say critics, including Brian Hooker, who's PhD, Children's Health Defense Chief Scientific Officer, and Dr. Peter McCullough, a cardiologist, said the CDC study was flawed and that the authors failed to mention the many prior studies documenting a link between COVID vaccination and cardiac problems. Hooker said, the study disproves nothing. There are myriad of studies showing the link between COVID vaccines and cardiac sequelae. This is just the CDC's Band-Aid to cover all the good science with a poorly thought out and deceptive study. McCullough said, as a cardiologist, I do not find this study reassuring. Numerous Twitter users formerly, they ridiculed the CDC report and the NBC's coverage of this. And, silly things like, well, gosh, if the CDC says so and the NBC endorses the study, it must be right. Right? Study counts only 3 deaths in vaccinated, says none caused by the vaccine. Of course, they only looked in one area. It wasn't like it was a nationwide study, and it was only for a shorter period of time. It's not ongoing, which you should be doing an ongoing study because some people aren't going to have heart attacks or myocarditis within 6 months or even a year after. It could take years. It all depends on how much energy they exert and how much they push their heart after their hearts have already been damaged, unfortunately, or at least some people. Hooker says one simply cannot rule out cardiac deaths that occur over 100 days since vaccine administration. Underlying issues caused by the COVID vaccine could cause cardiac deaths after the 100-day cutoff the study authors arbitrarily choose. And that's what I was just saying. McCullough says we are seeing deaths occur after vaccines due to inferred accumulating spike protein and myocarditis long after 100 days. And the authors of the CDC report, CHD writes, they also overlooked that the coroners hesitated to note anything about vaccination on the death certificates. Hooker said, so it's not surprising that they didn't find death certificates because, people were afraid to say the truth. And they also say the authors did no comparison of the incidence of cardiac death before and after the rollout of the vaccine to see if there was a spike, which other people have done those studies and looking for all-cause mortality and things like that. Now, to add to that, I want to show you this report from around that same time, April 17th. The Dossier Today, which is Jordan Schachtel, which he's good on some stuff, he's horrible on on Zionism and Israel. Biden admin commission report concludes Pfizer and Moderna mRNA shots cause myocarditis. And look, here they are again admitting this. Excuse me. They're admitting it right here. They're not going to say it publicly. They're not going to make a big deal about it. But a new report published in April 17th from the National Academies concluded that there is a direct relationship between COVID shots and myocarditis, a disease that causes inflammation of the heart muscle. The report, titled Evidence Review of the Adverse Effects of COVID-19 Vaccination and Intramuscular Vaccine Administration. This marks the first time that a government commission report has acknowledged the direct association between Pfizer and Moderna's mRNA shots and myocarditis. And again, this is, I know, not going to be new to many of us who've already paid attention to this stuff, but use this as fuel when you're trying to talk to somebody who is a, excuse me, guys, I need to blow my nose in a second. Apologies. You're trying to talk to somebody who is like a normie person who only trusts the mainstream, then you can pull up this study, Evidence Review of the Adverse Effects of COVID-19 Vax and Intramuscular Vaccine Administration, published in 2024. It's a 336 report from the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, NASEM. This is a very well-respected institution. And you go to a 314-page report, concluded that there was insufficient evidence to demonstrate a causal relationship for a variety of potential harms, but it did conclude that there is a direct causal link between the mRNA shots and myocarditis. Chapter 7, myocarditis, pericarditis, and the COVID vaccines. Box 7.1, conclusions from myocarditis and pericarditis. Conclusion 7-1, the evidence establishes a causal relationship between the BNT 16-2B2 Pfizer vaccine and myocarditis. Conclusion 7.2, the evidence establishes a causal relationship between the mRNA 1273 vaccine, which is Moderna, and myocarditis. That's right there in the NASEM report. So we got the CDC over here saying, you know, doing some small sample in Oregon and claiming with NBC News that this debunks any claims about the mRNA shots and sudden cardiac death. But then you got the NASEM report under the Biden administration saying that there is causal relationship between the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and myocarditis. And it says right here, in patients with vaccine-associated myocarditis, elevated levels of spike protein were detected in their blood and on myocardial tissue. Studies in animal models and ex vivo human samples show a connection between myocarditis and the activation of specific immune pathways triggered by our mRNA COVID vaccines. You guys remember when they were telling us, no, the spike protein stays in the arm. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't travel anywhere in the body. It won't be found in the tissue. It was all bullshit. Now the report only studies myocarditis resulting from the first 2 COVID shots. So that's the thing, is there's still no ongoing studies there's people who say they've got freaking 8 boosters by this point. Like, what is that doing to that person? And if they exert themselves they go play soccer or something, which involves a lot of running, they might have a heart attack or cardiac arrest, unfortunately. This is a reality, my friends. So no matter what the CDC is trying to pull over here in NBC News and other mainstream, they're not talking about this NASEM report. I don't see them mentioning that at all. I don't think there's been any mainstream discussion about this. So I'll include all these in the show notes. And I just wanted to mention that up because I know we're far away from COVID. A lot of times it seems like that's all 2020, 2023, right? But clearly we're still feeling the impacts and the effects of COVID. People are still getting these shots. People are still feeling the effects of the shots. People can still fall sick and ill as a result of the shots. So we need to know the truth about them, and we need to help our brothers and sisters who maybe still are buying that propaganda realize that they do not need them. They do not give them to the kids. Do not give them to the young ones, to the elderly. They might end up killing them. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not, just not a medical opinion, medical advice. I'm just saying, the data's out there, and that's just the latest data from the U.S. government's National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, NASEM, saying that. So all these will be linked in the show notes, guys.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.